Nobody likes to feel rejected. Whether it's a relationship that's gone bad or maybe you've lost your job, the feeling of rejection hurts, and it can be a bad time in our lives. Whenever we have been or we've felt rejected, oftentimes that can lead us to a place where we're desiring mercy. Matthew 5:7 in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy." And oftentimes it's when we've been so rejected or we feel even disqualified that those are the times in life when we have a desire to be shown mercy. And so a lot of times it's when we've been rejected and when we're in that down place that God is ready to show his mercy to us and do something awesome in our lives. Check out this story from Pastor Tim to see how this has played out in his life.
When I was a teenager in high school, I had this job that I worked at for pretty much all of my high school career, probably from my summer after my freshman year until I graduated from high school. And at this place, we did really almost everything connected with food. We cut meat. There was a meat market, obviously, with various different types of steaks and so forth, and then deli as well, cheese and so forth. So there's a deli meat sort of market. There was a grocery store there. There was, in addition to that, there was also, we had ice cream that we served people. We made pizza. We made burgers and various other things. So all these things, I worked there for 3.5 years and loved the job. But naturally, once I graduated and decided to go to Bowling Green State University, then I quit that job because it wasn't going to be feasible for me to be at school. And my friend and I were staying on campus that first year, and then also commute back and work in my hometown as well. It wasn't a huge distance, but it was enough where it was time for me to quit and focus on college. And so, like a good dad, maybe, my dad was potentially concerned or maybe even worried about the fact that I was going to school, I was incurring all of these expenses, all of this debt, and yet I had no income to offset that debt. Things to pay for, gas, car, etc. It wasn't on my mind, but it was on his mind, and that drove him potentially to have a dream. And his dream that he shared with me and then eventually our pastor was that he saw me hanging out with students, talking with them, connecting with them, and ultimately, hopefully, connecting them to the Lord or to a stronger connection with Jesus. And so he had this dream of me doing something with youth ministry. Our home church had a youth pastor for about 1.5 years, and then he was let go my senior year in high school, I think it was. And so there was this idea that, maybe that would be something I could do. So he shared that then with our pastor. Pastor Lee Heine was his name at Mount Zion. He called me up or talked to me on a Sunday and said, "Hey, why don't you come in sometime?" And so similar to this type of scenario, he called me in. I sat down on his leather, kind of vinyl black couch, and I had a discussion with him, and he was on the other side of his desk, and so we were talking about this, and he says, "What do you think about this? Is this something that you would be interested in? Would this be a job that you could do where you would be leading the Wednesday night youth group, and you would be spending time with students, you'd be organizing activities and so forth? Would this be something that would interest you?" And I said, "Well, I would be interested in it. It seems like a flexible schedule where it can work with me going to college, and so it seems like a good fit. I would be interested in talking about it." He says, "Okay, well, give me some time and I'll do some work and then I'll get back to you." So he did what he needed to do. He came back to me and said, "We would love to have you do this about 15, 20 hours a week. You can make those hours however you deem fit, as long as you're making sure you're covering the right things. And obviously we know that you're going to school and all that." And I'm like, "Okay, I can do that." And he says, and we will pay you, I think it was like $5.25 an hour, which compared to where it was before, it was a huge change. And so I was excited about it as a job. And so then I took it. But that is what it was. It was a job. I loved it, but it was just a job. But then over time, God used that to kind of ignite a fire for ministry within my heart. In addition to that, I went to some training because I wanted to do, even at that point, I wanted to do the job well. And so I went to Sun Life trainings, in fact, multiple Sun Life trainings that really rooted all of their experience and all of their training in Scripture and how Jesus did ministry as well. And God used that, and even taking a graduate class from Huntington College, which is the United Brethren's college at that point in time. Before I was even graduated, I took a graduate level class before I even graduated from college. I expanded, or they expanded rather, my abilities and things that I could do at Mount Zion, my home church. And so in addition to leading the youth ministry, then I was able to lead worship as well. I helped out the pastor at various different times with things that needed to be done. And so my heart for ministry really grew while I was there. And in essence, after about 3 or 4 years, God called me completely into ministry. Prior to that, I had a full-time job while I was going to college because it grew from 20 hours to 40 plus hours. But even in that beginning parts, it was just a job. But God used my time there to call me into full-time ministry. After going through Sun Life and after taking a graduate level class from a college that was teaching pastors on how to be pastors, God used that to call me into ministry. And I loved it. But there was something that really didn't go as well as I would have liked it to.
So when we've gone through a season in life of rejection, oftentimes it can just feel like something is off. And there's this deep feeling of something missing, which even leads to feelings, more permanent feelings of disqualification in life. And this disqualification should and does often lead us to reevaluation and just reevaluating our lives to see if we are showing mercy, that we might receive mercy as well. And hopefully this reevaluation leads us to change.
So I thoroughly enjoyed what I was able to do at my home church. I started in 93, and it wasn't until maybe about 97 or 98 when it seemed like there was something, as I mentioned before, there was just something off. Something that it seemed like there was a stopping point, and we really didn't know what it was. And Pastor Lee and I, we talked about it many times, and then we finally came up with, that Jesus himself said in Mark 6, verse 4, he says that a prophet is honored everywhere, but at his hometown, he's not. And so Jesus even encountered this in his own hometown, where people are like, well, isn't that the son of Joseph and Mary the carpenter? And so I experienced that a little bit at my home church. And so at that point, it was almost like Shelley and I had been married for a year or so. And so we thought, maybe God is calling us to move on. But there were feelings of rejection, or there's feelings of, well, maybe I'm not even able to do ministry at all. Maybe this is an indication that there will always be a lid. Nonetheless, we pursued forward, and I threw out a lot of resumes and reached out to a lot of people to find a new position. Places from Pennsylvania all the way over to Illinois, down southern Ohio, and into Michigan as well. There were lots of trips that I took in the hopes of landing a job and finding a place that was a good fit for me. In fact, one time I remember I was in our apartment on Napoleon Road in Bowling Green, and I got this phone call from a church that had received my resume, and they called me back, and I was so excited. It was on the wireless phone of our apartment, and I answered it, and they said, hey, it seems like our paths really coincide. Like your idea, your philosophy of ministry matches up with ours almost exactly. And I knew what church it was, and I remember being very excited about that church being a possibility. And so they ended the phone call basically by saying, hey, you know what? We're excited about having you out. We will fly you out. You will get to know us. You'll come see what we're all about. And then maybe it'll work out. We'll hire you. But that didn't happen. A day went by, 2 days went by, a weekend went by, weeks went by, and finally I called them and said, hey, what's going on? And they said, oh, well, we've filled the position already. And it was at that point where my heart sunk and I totally felt disqualified. Literally, I had been to Pennsylvania a couple times. I had been Southern Ohio probably 2 or 3 times. I had been to Michigan 2 or 3 times, Indiana and Illinois several times. Many conversations, many interviews, and nothing was happening. And so I felt totally rejected. I felt totally disqualified and not able to make or to pursue that next step. I felt as if I wasn't supposed to be in ministry almost. And then something happened.
Sometimes we've experienced these seasons of rejection so long that there becomes a desperation inside of us, a desperate feeling to stop feeling disqualified. And it's at that moment of desperation that oftentimes God does something amazing.
So a few weeks later, after hearing that devastating to me news, and even during that time, I'm like, well, I don't know, maybe I'm just meant to stay here. But a few weeks later, I received a phone call out of the blue. Shelley and I were married. We were living in an apartment in Bowling Green, and I received this phone call out of the blue, and this guy by the name of Bob said, hey, my name is Bob Sons, and we didn't know if you wanted to come and interview for a position that we have here. And I'm like, well, I don't even know who you are. I don't know where you're calling from. I don't know how you got my information. It was totally out of the blue. And he said, oh, well, we're Grace Church, and we got your name from the other church that said, that you were a good candidate, but they went a different direction. And I'm like, oh, okay, so you're close by. So anyways, long story short, we set up this interview time. I drove out to Chicago area and walked to the door of the church, what I thought was the front door, and it was locked. And then I walked all the way in the back, and so the back is on a lower level, and eventually they let me in, and I got in and walked into a place like this, and there were 2 students. There were probably 6 to 7 adults in this room around tables like this, like a Sunday school room, and the interview started. And it was a really good interview. Like, I loved engaging with them and dialoguing with them. In fact, it kind of went too long to where one gentleman said, hey, we have someone else coming, so we probably need to let you go. And so I walked away. I'm like, that went fairly well. But then when I got to the hotel room, I called Shelley and I said, I don't think this is going to be a good fit. Just for various reasons, it just didn't seem like it was meant to be. So I got up in the morning and left, came home, and I don't know, maybe 7 days later, I got a call from Bob and said, hey, we wanna have you come out for a weekend, work with the pastor and figure it out what weekend, and we'll have you out and you can get to know us, you can learn more about us, you can see things in action, and we want you to come out. And I'm like, okay. And then obviously, bring Shelley, your wife, as well. And so I did that, but the Thursday before that weekend visit that was supposed to start, I think on Friday night or Saturday morning, that Thursday before, I called Pastor Andy up. He was the pastor there. And I said, Andy, I just don't think we're supposed to come. It's 4 hours away. It doesn't seem like it's close enough for us. And so I don't think we're going to come. He's like, can you read something? And I said, well, sure. And he said, well, read Romans 12, 1 and 2. And I read it, and it says to test and to know his will. I don't have it memorized, but he said, just all I'm asking you to do, Tim, is would you just come out and check us out? Just spend a weekend with us. If anything, you get a weekend away, and then let us know what you think after that. I'm like, okay, we can do that. So Shelly and I went out there. Shelly was, at that point in time, maybe 3-4 months pregnant. And we went out there, may have been even 6 or 7 months pregnant. Went out there, visited, had an amazing time. And more so, we fell in love with the people. And then secondly, I think God really called us to Grace Church in Lansing, Illinois. And so we walked away from that and we're like, if this is where it's supposed to be, then this is where it's supposed to be. It seemed like we felt disqualified before, but now it seemed as if God says, okay, you were disqualified from all the different visits that you made all over the Midwest, basically, so that you could come here. So then we accepted that call. They invited us. They hired us. We moved that very next weekend, even though Shelly was at that point in time 8 weeks or 8 months pregnant. Went on a retreat with them, had an amazing weekend with their high school students, and the relationship just really blossomed from there. We had just some crazy good things that happened when I was able to be the pastor of student ministries at Grace Church. From a middle school ministry to a high school ministry, I was able to preach once in a while, and just the connections that we had and the relationships that we had, the experiences that we had were absolutely awesome. And during that time, I connected with the youth pastor from that former church that I thought was going to call me in and I was going to go visit. It seemed like a church that really matched who I was and my philosophy on ministry. Found out and experienced, actually, that they had went through a few youth pastors in the time that I was at Grace Church. And we were there from 2000, early part of 2000 to the ending part of 2005. So almost 6 years, and they had went through multiple youth pastors while I was there. And so it was almost like, God, were you protecting me? Was it not a fit? Was it not meant to be? That even in the midst of me feeling disqualified, it's almost like you disqualified me from entering what I thought was the perfect ministry setting that would be an excellent match for me and an excellent match potentially for them. Were you disqualifying me for that? And did you have this that you chose me for that was even better than what I could have imagined? And it's like that a lot in life, that there's times where we feel disqualified, but then God disqualifies us for that so that we can have something much better that He has chosen for, which is this.